The cold scent of lilies lingered in the air as I stood at my husband's funeral, my fingers trembling just enough to notice. Still, I couldn't look away from the screen of his phone. A message from him. Don't trust them. As I stared, the weight of his death suddenly didn't make sense. The same name lit up again. Graham Rhodes. While the words echoed in my mind, my heart raced with questions. Why was he warning me from beyond the grave? That's when I realized I was about to uncover a truth he died protecting. And now, it was my turn to fight. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The funeral home smelled like lilies and incense, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes and made you feel heavy, as if the air itself was mourning. Caroline stood next to the coffin, her hand brushing the polished wood, her knuckles white as she gripped it for balance. Around her, the mourners whispered, their faces downcast, their voices hushed, as if the act of speaking too loudly might disturb Graham's peace. But her world felt anything but peaceful. Her gaze was fixed on the casket in front of her, on him, Graham, her husband, the man who had been everything to her, and now, the man she had to say goodbye to forever. The weight of his absence pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. As the priest murmured prayers in the background, Caroline's hand accidentally brushed against Graham's coat pocket. Something vibrated inside. At first, she thought it was just a shift in the air, a tremor from the moment. But then the vibration came again, steady and insistent. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a split second, her mind went blank. His phone. She knew it was his. It was the one thing they hadn't thought to take before the service. The tradition. The phone always stayed with the body until the very end. Her heart pounded, loud enough to drown out the priest's voice, loud enough to make her fingers tremble as she slipped her hand into the coat pocket and pulled the device out, as discreetly as she could. The screen flashed on as she held it, and she froze. One unread message. The sender's name stopped her cold. Graham Rhodes. Her hands went still, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She quickly pressed the mute button, her fingers slipping, almost dropping the phone. For a brief moment she just stared at the name, as if the screen itself might change, as if she was imagining this moment entirely. But no, it was real. And the message, it wasn't just from Graham. It was from him. The message itself was short, cryptic. It was the kind of thing you'd never expect to find in a message, let alone from a man lying in a casket. Don't trust them. The words hit her like a slap in the face, and the blood drained from her cheeks. The phone felt heavier in her hand, as if it now carried the weight of an entire world of questions. Her hands shook uncontrollably, and she felt a sharp sting in her throat, like a scream waiting to tear free. But she couldn't scream. Not here. Not in front of everyone. Not in front of the people who were quietly judging her grief, silently calculating her pain. She wasn't allowed to lose control. Not now. She quickly shoved the phone into her purse, her movements jerky, unnatural, as if she was trying to hide the truth from the room, as if doing so would somehow protect her from the words on the screen. Behind her, Angela's voice broke through the fog of her thoughts. Is everything okay? Angela's tone was too sweet, too knowing, as if she had seen the way Caroline's hands had trembled. Caroline didn't look up. She couldn't. Not yet. Not when the words were still echoing in her mind, the message like an invisible weight, pressing down on her chest. Just a vibration, Caroline said, the words slipping out of her mouth before she could even think. It was a lie, but it was the only thing she could offer in the moment. Angela didn't press further. She was too caught up in the solemnity of the occasion, too wrapped up in herself to notice anything was truly amiss. The service went on around Caroline, but she was no longer part of it. Her thoughts spun in circles, tangled up in the message from Graham. Don't trust them. Who was he warning her about? Who was them? And why had he sent this message now, in the final moments before his death? Was it just a random message, a glitch, or something more? Her mind raced, but every answer only led to more questions. Later, back at her house, Caroline sat on the edge of their bed, holding Graham's phone in her lap. The house was silent, too silent, and every little creak of the floorboards felt like an intrusion. The quiet was suffocating. She stared at the phone again, her fingers hovering over it. She wanted to open it. She needed to know. But the phone was locked. Of course it was locked. Graham's phone, his privacy. She knew the passcode was probably something personal, something only he would know. But how badly did she need to know the truth? Her hand shook as she held the phone in front of her face, and the recognition system pinged, scanning her eyes. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. The phone clicked open. She stared at the message again. It was still there. Still just as strange. Still just as terrifying. The words rang in her head. Don't trust them. Who, Graham? Who? She closed her eyes, tucking the phone back into her purse. She kissed the screen of the phone, one last gesture of connection, and pressed it tight against her chest. The house was colder now, quieter. Caroline sat at the edge of their bed, Graham's phone resting in her lap. Its glow like a silent pulse, calling to her. The weight of the message still sat heavily on her chest. Don't trust them. Who had Graham been talking about? And why now? After everything. The silence in the house was suffocating. It felt wrong. This void where he used to be. She tried to push the thought away, focusing on the phone in front of her instead. The keys glowed faintly under her fingertips. She had to know more. The message couldn't just end there. There had to be something else. Something that would make sense of this. She turned the phone over in her hands, tracing the edges of it with her fingers, as if the answers might be hidden in the sleek design. Her mind felt like it was buzzing, fragments of possibilities darting across it. His business, the car crash, Angela. It all circled back to that one question. Who did Graham trust? She pressed the button to wake the screen, and the lock screen appeared. Her pulse quickened. The time read 11:42 p.m. She stared at the empty, locked interface, knowing she had to get past it if she wanted any answers. She couldn't just leave it here, a puzzle with no solution. The phone was Graham's, which meant the passcode was something personal, something only he would know. She breathed out slowly, trying to calm herself, steady her shaking hands. First, she tried his birthday. The numbers felt foreign as she typed them in, the passcode still too raw, too recent. The screen flashed red, rejecting her attempt with a soft beep. She swallowed, frustrated, but pushed it aside. It was worth a shot. She didn't expect it to work anyway. Still, it hurt to see the phone reject her touch, as though it knew her better than she knew herself. Her heart raced as she typed in their wedding anniversary next. The date felt too close to the surface, the one she knew best, the one she could recall in a heartbeat. But again, the phone rejected it. The message. Don't trust them. A bead of sweat formed at the back of her neck. What was she missing? She thought about it. About him. About his habits. Graham was practical. Careful. He wouldn't have used something too obvious. Her pulse thrummed in her throat. And then, almost instinctively, her fingers hovered over the numbers again. Caleb. She didn't know why it occurred to her, but she typed in Caleb's birth year without even thinking. It felt wrong, like she was trespassing on a private moment, but it didn't matter now. The phone unlocked. A tiny exhale of relief left her. A shiver running down her spine. She hadn't expected it to be so simple. It was Caleb's birth year. Of course, she thought. Caleb and Graham had always been close, even when they fought. There had been a connection, even if they were estranged in the final months of his life. The phone blinked open, and Caroline's eyes were immediately drawn to the message. It stood alone. No prior texts, no thread of communication, nothing to explain why Graham had sent this. She tapped on the message itself, her heart skipping a beat. The text still sat there, simple but ominous. Don't trust them. But what caught her attention next wasn't just the message, it was the sender's name, Graham Rhodes. But something was off. The number didn't look familiar. It wasn't his usual contact number. She would have known it anywhere. This was different. Something completely foreign. Caroline's stomach twisted into a knot. A burner phone. She tapped the number, the screen flashing as it recognized the unknown contact. Her eyes flitted to the corners of the screen, the area where information about the sender would typically appear. But instead of a regular phone number, there was just a long string of digits, and an area code she didn't recognize. It sent a chill up her spine, and she quickly reversed the digits, typing them into the search bar of her laptop. The results were almost instant. The number wasn't tied to any name, any account. It was a burner phone, likely discarded the moment it had served its purpose. A tool, not a person. Caroline's stomach turned. Who would Graham trust with something like this? Who would he trust enough to send a message like that and leave behind this kind of evidence? And why wasn't he telling her directly? Why hide it behind a message? Behind a burner phone? She stared at the screen, her mind racing. She had no answers. Only more questions. More confusion. The kind that could swallow her whole if she let it. In the distance, she heard a soft noise, a creak in the floorboards, just out of reach. Her head snapped up, her eyes scanning the dark house, the silence pressing in around her like a thick fog. She wasn't alone. The phone was still in her lap, the screen glowing faintly in the dim light. The unease in her chest deepened. Who was out there? Was someone watching her? Her finger hovered over the call button. She needed to speak to Caleb. There was no way around it. This wasn't a coincidence. He had to know something about the burner phone, about why Graham would send a message like this. But before she could press dial, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, closer now, drawing nearer. Caroline couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond her grasp. The house was still too quiet, but the weight of the unanswered questions pressed heavily against her chest. She had gone through every scenario in her head, piecing together the fractured clues Graham had left her. The burner phone, the cryptic message. Don't trust them. She opened the laptop again, scanning the history of Graham's transactions. Her fingers hovered over the keys as she searched for anything, any trace that might give her a direction. She'd already checked his emails, his personal accounts, but nothing seemed to tie things together. Then, buried among the bank statements, a name leapt out at her. Nathan Bell. Nathan Bell. The name sparked something in Caroline's memory, a foggy recollection that took a moment to sharpen. She had heard the name before, years ago, long before Graham's death had left a gaping hole in her life. Nathan Bell was a private investigator. Discreet, expensive, ex-law enforcement. He had helped Graham with something once, something Caroline had never fully understood. She only knew it had been handled quietly, without fanfare. At the time, Graham had brushed it off when she asked. Nothing serious, he'd said, but something about Nathan Bell never sat quite right with her. She clicked on the name, the details surrounding the transaction, and there it was, consulting. It was a small line item, an innocuous entry, but it was enough. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her as her fingers hovered over the phone. She had to find him. There were too many loose ends, too many pieces that didn't fit. The message. Why had Graham reached out to Nathan Bell? Was Nathan part of whatever this was? Caroline's heart raced as she grabbed her jacket and hurried to the door. The address was in an old part of town, nestled between buildings that looked like they hadn't been touched by time. The street was quiet, the kind of place where nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except for the feeling that something was amiss. As she pulled up to the building, a small, nondescript office tucked between two old brownstones, Caroline felt the chill of uncertainty wash over her. She hesitated for a moment, standing in front of the door. The name on the small plaque was barely visible, worn down by years of neglect. Nathan Bell, private investigator. She pushed the door open, the bell above it jingling softly. Inside, the office was dark, the only light coming from a desk lamp that illuminated a small corner of the room. Shelves lined the walls, filled with old case files and dusty boxes. The air smelled faintly of leather and coffee. But there was a sharpness to it too, like stale cigarette smoke clung to the walls. A man was sitting behind the desk, his back to her. He was older now, his hair graying at the temples, his shoulders slightly hunched. He didn't turn as she stepped inside, his attention fixed on something on the desk in front of him. Caroline cleared her throat, and his head snapped up, his eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't speak at first. There was a cautiousness about him, a wariness that felt like a physical barrier. His eyes were sharp, calculating. But there was something else there too, recognition. "Caroline Rhodes," he said, his voice low, rasping with age. It's been a long time. She didn't know if she should feel comforted by his recognition or uneasy about how easily he seemed to place her. I, uh, I need to speak with you. It's about Graham." At the mention of Graham's name, something flickered in his expression, something fleeting but unmistakable. Nathan Bell set his pen down slowly, leaning back in his chair. He regarded her for a moment longer than she was comfortable with, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're not supposed to be here, Caroline," he said, his tone soft, almost apologetic. "Graham, he didn't want you involved." Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to say that, not so bluntly. She had expected questions, confusion, maybe even suspicion, but not this. "I don't care what Graham wanted," Caroline replied, her voice shaking slightly, but strong. "I need to know what he was doing. I need to understand what happened to him. Why did he hire you? What did he know?" Nathan's eyes softened, but there was still a distance between them, an invisible wall. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk in front of him. "Graham came to me because he was trying to uncover something inside his own family. Fraud. Forgery. He was asking questions no one else wanted to answer." Caroline felt a chill run through her. Fraud? Forgery? This was bigger than she'd imagined. "Why didn't he tell me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Nathan's eyes darkened, a quiet regret flashing behind them. "He didn't want to drag you into it. He knew it was dangerous. Too dangerous." She felt a tightening in her chest as his words sank in. What had Graham been involved in? What had he uncovered before everything came crashing down? "Did he say anything else?" Caroline pressed. "Anything about who was behind it? What they were after?" Nathan didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked to the door as if expecting someone to walk in, or perhaps hoping someone would. Finally, he sighed. "I can't tell you everything," he said, his voice low, almost a murmur. "But I'll help you, Caroline. Just one coffee. That's all I'll give you for now. You need to understand this carefully. I won't let you walk into something you can't handle." The hesitation in his voice was enough to make her stomach flip. She nodded slowly, desperate for answers, but still unsure of how deep the rabbit hole really went. She could feel it now. She wasn't just asking questions anymore. She was getting pulled in, and there was no way out. Nathan stood and motioned toward a small kitchenette in the corner. One coffee then. Let's talk. But be ready. You won't like everything I'm about to tell you. As she followed him, Caroline couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had believed about her husband, about her life, was about to change. Forever. Caroline's hands gripped the chipped ceramic mug Nathan had handed her, the warm coffee inside barely doing anything to ease the cold creeping through her veins. Nathan had already seated himself across from her, his fingers tapping absently against the edge of his mug, his expression unreadable. The dim light of the single lamp overhead cast long shadows, making the space feel even smaller than it was. The weight of the silence between them was thick, almost suffocating. Caroline's thoughts were a jumble, the pieces of the puzzle starting to form but never quite falling into place. She needed answers. She needed to know what Graham had been mixed up in before his death, and more importantly, what it had to do with the cryptic message he'd sent her. Nathan took a long sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving hers. 6 months ago, Graham hired me, he said, his voice steady, measured, as if this was just another job to him, even though Caroline knew it hadn't been. He came to me because he suspected something was off in his family business. Caroline leaned forward, her heart skipping a beat. What kind of something? Nathan exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping the edge of his mug again. Forged documents, odd transfers of money, the kind of thing that doesn't add up unless someone's trying to hide something. He thought someone was using his identity to manipulate things. Caroline's throat tightened. Using his identity. Her mind flicked back to the message from Graham's phone. Don't trust them. Had Graham uncovered the truth before it was too late? Why didn't he tell me about it? Caroline's voice cracked as the question escaped her lips, the rawness of her grief mixing with the burning need for answers. Nathan shrugged, his face impassive. But his eyes darkened with something she couldn't place. He didn't want to drag you into it if things got ugly, he said softly. And he knew it would. There are people involved in this. People who wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it takes to cover their tracks. Caroline felt a coldness settle into her bones. People involved. She had suspected something like that, but hearing it out loud, hearing Nathan acknowledge it, made the danger suddenly feel much more real, much more immediate. He was trying to protect me, Caroline said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. But why did he leave me in the dark? Why didn't he tell me what he knew? Why didn't he warn me? Nathan didn't answer immediately. His gaze shifted, and Caroline saw the flicker of regret pass through his eyes, quickly masked. He was holding something back. She could feel it. He set his mug down slowly, his movements deliberate, before leaning forward slightly. I think Graham knew there wasn't much time, Nathan said quietly. He was digging into things he shouldn't have. He knew the risk. And maybe he didn't want to involve you in the fallout. Caroline's chest tightened. She swallowed, trying to push the rising panic down, trying to keep her voice steady. What fallout? Nathan's face tightened, his jaw clenching as he leaned back in his chair. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, Caroline. If Graham had kept pushing, things would have gotten ugly. He was on the verge of finding something big, and I think it cost him. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier. Caroline's mind raced, but she couldn't keep up with the thoughts fast enough. She felt as if she were standing at the edge of something vast and deep, but she couldn't see the bottom. Graham left something for you, Nathan added, his tone shifting to something more serious. Caroline blinked, confused. Left something? Nathan didn't reply right away. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small rusted key. He slid it across the table toward her. What's this? Caroline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A safety deposit box, Nathan said, his gaze steady. Graham left this with me before before things got bad. He wanted you to have it when the time came. Caroline stared at the key, her mind swirling with 1,000 possibilities. A safety deposit box? What was in it? Why had Graham chosen to hide something like this from her, even as he was unraveling the truth? I don't understand, she said, her voice thick. Why didn't he just tell me about this himself? Why keep it from me? Nathan's eyes softened, but there was a heaviness in his expression that made Caroline's chest ache. Because, Caroline, I think he knew you were going to need it. And I think he knew you were going to find it when it all came crashing down. She picked up the key, feeling the weight of it in her palm. It felt like an anchor, heavy and solid, pulling her deeper into a mystery she hadn't even begun to understand. But something about it didn't sit right. If Graham had wanted to protect her, why had he hidden this from her for so long? Why hadn't he told her about it while he was still alive, so she could have helped him? What's in the box? She asked again, almost pleading. She needed to know. She needed to understand what was in there. Nathan's gaze flickered, and for a moment, Caroline thought he might finally reveal everything. But then, just as quickly, he stood up, his face hardening. You'll know soon enough, he said, his voice low. But be careful, Caroline. Whatever's in that box, it's not going to be easy to deal with. It's not just about your husband anymore. It's about a lot more than that. Her heart pounded as she watched him move toward the door, a finality in his step that sent a chill through her. The key burned in her hand, and with it, the knowledge that she was standing on the edge of something dark and dangerous. Be careful, Nathan repeated, his voice like a warning in the air. And just like that, Caroline was alone again, holding a key that could unravel everything. The bank was a stark contrast to the mess of confusion in Caroline's mind. Inside, the polished marble floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the air smelled faintly of something cold and sterile, like metal and bureaucracy. She approached the counter, the small rusted key still clutched tightly in her hand, her palm sweating despite the coolness of the room. The manager, a middle-aged man with gray hair and a permanent frown, took one look at her and then at the key, before glancing at the notarized note Nathan had given her. Caroline felt a pang of unease, her heart kicking into a faster rhythm. She could feel her own pulse in her neck, thrumming in time with the uncertainty that was building around her. Are you sure you have the right box? The manager asked, his voice polite but laced with an undercurrent of skepticism. He eyed the key in her hand again, his face unreadable. She nodded. Yes, it's for Graham Rhodes. The box is in his name. There was a slight pause, and the manager's expression didn't change. He didn't ask for any more information. Instead, he turned and motioned for her to follow him as he led her to a back room. Caroline's stomach churned, every step feeling like she was getting closer to some final, unspoken revelation. They stopped in front of a long row of deposit boxes. The manager glanced at the key in his hand, his eyes scanning the list in front of him. This one, he muttered, pulling out a small silver box from the row. The key turned easily, and as the heavy metal door swung open, Caroline's breath caught. She had no idea what she was expecting, but this wasn't it. The box wasn't filled with anything flashy, no stacks of cash, no documents brimming with secrets. Instead, there was only a thin manila folder, its edges frayed with age, and a small USB drive nestled in the corner. Caroline's fingers trembled as she lifted the folder out, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. The manager stood off to the side, watching her closely but not saying anything. She could feel his eyes on her, as if he were waiting for something to go wrong, as if he knew there was something about this moment that wasn't ordinary. The folder was heavy in her hands, like it carried the weight of 1,000 secrets, 1,000 lies. She pulled it open, the brittle paper inside making a soft rustling sound as it unfolded. The first few pages were what she had expected: business reports, tax documents. But then her eyes froze on the next set of papers: falsified tax documents, family business accounting reports with discrepancies, forged signatures. Caroline's stomach twisted in on itself. The name at the top of the list was unmistakable: Angela Whitlow, Graham's sister. Her name appeared again and again, scrawled across official-looking documents, her signature forged in places where it shouldn't have been. Caroline felt her vision blur, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest like a vice. This was bigger than she thought. The cracks in Graham's family, his own flesh and blood, ran deeper than she had imagined. But the letter, the one at the bottom of the stack, was what stopped her. It was written in Graham's handwriting, his familiar scrawl that made it feel almost like he was still there with her, still alive. "If you're reading this, they got to me." The words hit her like a slap, her breath catching in her throat as the rest of the letter slipped into focus. "I don't know if you'll find this in time, but I need you to know the truth. I didn't have much time left when I found out. Angela is behind it all. She's been using the company's accounts to fund her own life. She and Dennis have been covering their tracks for years, but it won't be long before the truth comes out. They will try to silence me, but I need you to fight for what's right." The letter went on, but Caroline couldn't read anymore. She folded it up and pressed it to her chest, her hands shaking violently. Angela, her sister-in-law, had been at the center of it all. But how deep did it go? How far had they been willing to go to keep the truth buried? Caroline couldn't breathe. She grabbed the folder and rushed out of the room, the sharp edges of the paper digging into her palms. The manager didn't stop her as she left, his silence making her feel as if she were walking through some unseen web of conspiracy. She barely registered the drive back to her car, her mind spinning. Angela, Dennis. Everything was falling apart around her. Back in the car, Caroline shoved the folder into the passenger seat and plugged the USB drive into her old laptop, her hands still trembling. The screen flickered on as it recognized the device, and her pulse quickened. What had Graham found? What would be on this drive that could change everything? She stared at the password screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She didn't know what the password was. Had Graham left her a clue? Was it something he had told her once and forgotten to mention again? The words, "Don't trust them," echoed in her mind. Angela and Dennis. Had he been warning her all along? With a deep breath, Caroline typed in the only word that felt right: Graham. The screen didn't flash red. It didn't reject her entry. Instead, it just blinked once, then granted access. She stared at the files that appeared in front of her: documents, spreadsheets, voice recordings. She clicked on the first file, a document labeled simply "The Truth." Her stomach lurched as she opened it. The file was full of the same kind of evidence she had just seen in the manila folder, but with more details, details that made her blood run cold. This wasn't just about family betrayal. This was about something much darker. And Caroline knew. She was in too deep. The USB drive felt cold and heavy in Caroline's hand, like a weight of its own. The folder she'd opened on her laptop was already brimming with evidence, but this was different. The things Graham had left behind were more than just business dealings or family secrets. They were a map to the truth, a map that was now leading her to something darker than she could have ever imagined. The first thing Caroline noticed were the wire transfer logs. They were simple, almost clinical in their format, but they told a devastating story. Hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned off from the family company's accounts. The transfers were scattered over months, moving from one shell company to the next, until they disappeared into an unknown LLC. The more Caroline looked, the more she felt a creeping sense of dread tighten her chest. This wasn't just about money, it was about betrayal on a level she hadn't yet understood. As she scrolled, her heart nearly stopped when she saw the name of the LLC's treasurer, Dennis Whitlow, Angela's husband, her brother-in-law, the man she'd known and trusted, even if only loosely. A wave of nausea hit Carolyn as she sat back in the chair, the realization sinking in. Caleb had warned her. He'd always warned her that there were things she didn't know. He had told her once that Graham had been suspicious of the whole family, but Caroline hadn't wanted to believe him. Now, she couldn't ignore it. The money trail led directly to Dennis. He had been involved in this all along, pulling the strings in the shadows, hiding the truth behind the company's finances. And Angela, too. Her name had been all over those forged documents. But now Caroline was starting to understand the full extent of what Graham had been dealing with before his death. Her fingers hovered over the files, her stomach twisting with every page she opened. She had to keep going. There was more. At the very bottom of the list of files, buried among the spreadsheets and financial reports, was something different, a voice memo. She clicked on it, her pulse quickening. The sound that came through was faint at first, as though Graham had been recording it in a hurry, trying to get the words out before it was too late. The crackling quality of the recording made Caroline's heart thud in her chest. It was Graham's voice, calm but laced with something darker, something scared. "They want me out," Graham's voice said, and the words sent a chill straight to Caroline's bones. The next part of the recording was even worse. The crackling deepened as Graham's voice grew softer, quieter, as though he was speaking from somewhere distant, somewhere colder. "If I die, it wasn't random." The words lingered in the air long after the recording ended. Caroline sat frozen, her hand trembling over the mouse. Her mind raced. He had known. He had known something was coming. He had been trying to warn her. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in around her. If he hadn't been killed by accident, if his death had been planned, then the people responsible were still out there. Angela and Dennis. But why? What was the full extent of what they had been hiding? And who else was involved? Caroline's hands shook as she turned the next page, desperate to find something, anything, that would explain it all. She needed more answers, but as she scanned the next few files, her eyes caught on something that made her stomach drop even further. More wire transfers, and this time, the amounts were larger. The destination was the same unknown LLC, but these transfers didn't have Dennis's name on them. Instead, there was another name she didn't recognize at all. Charles Caldwell. Her pulse quickened again. She had never heard that name before, but now it was the only thing that stood out against the sea of numbers. Charles Caldwell had been receiving money, but Caroline couldn't find any further details about him. The LLC's account was shrouded in shadows, even darker now that she could see the connection. Her mind was racing, but she knew what she had to do next. She had to act. Caroline plugged in a new hard drive, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she copied everything: the documents, the spreadsheets, the voice memo, every file that Graham had left behind. She didn't know who would come after her, but she had to make sure she had all the evidence. If she didn't, she knew she might never get the chance to make things right. The progress bar on the screen crawled steadily, but her nerves were already on edge. She erased the original files from the laptop, wiping them clean so that no one else could find them. As the last file disappeared, Caroline stood up, her legs shaky beneath her. She felt the weight of the information she now carried. This wasn't just about family anymore. It wasn't just about betrayal. There was something larger at play here, something dangerous that stretched beyond her husband's death. The silence in the room felt suffocating as she picked up the hard drive and tucked it into her bag. She wasn't done yet. She couldn't stop now. She wouldn't let Graham's death be in vain. But as she stepped toward the door, a sound caught her ear. A soft, distant knock. Her heart skipped a beat, and she froze. Someone was here, and they knew what she had. The knock on the door echoed in Caroline's ears, sharp and sudden. Her heart stuttered in her chest, the sudden sound making the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She wasn't ready. She couldn't be ready. Not yet. Not with everything she had just uncovered. She froze, the hard drive tucked securely in her bag, the weight of Graham's files heavy on her shoulders. She hadn't expected anyone to be here, especially not this soon. She glanced at the laptop screen in front of her pulse hammering in her throat. The files, the USB drive, the truth. It was all too much. Too fast. The knock came again, this time louder, more insistent. Caroline's breath hitched as she slowly moved toward the door. Her mind raced. Who could it be? Was it Angela? Had she found out what Caroline had been doing? Her hand hovered over the doorknob, but instead of opening the door, she turned back to the laptop, her fingers flying over the keyboard with a sense of urgency. She couldn't afford to let anyone in, especially Angela. She had to lock things down first, make sure that no one could trace what she'd been doing. She needed to secure Graham's cloud, to protect the last of the evidence. Caroline quickly navigated to the login page for Graham's cloud account, her fingers moving with practiced speed. She knew the password was something personal, something that only Graham would have known. She remembered the small moments with him, the way his eyes had lit up when he talked about their wedding day, the anniversary dates, Caleb's birth year. But she didn't trust any of it anymore. This had to be secure. She had to be the one to control it. With a quick, steady breath, she typed in the password, then changed it before the screen had fully loaded. She wasn't taking any chances. She disabled the recovery options tied to Angela's email, ensuring that no one, especially her sister-in-law, could undo what she was about to do. The screen blinked, confirming the changes. She took a moment to collect herself, her hands trembling but steadying. Then she dove into the archive folder. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. But Graham had left her a map, hadn't he? The more she searched, the more she found. She clicked on one final file, an unfiled draft of Graham's new will. Her heart skipped as she opened it. The words jumped off the screen, stark and clear. Graham had been preparing for this. He had been anticipating a fight, a betrayal. Caroline felt a knot tighten in her chest as she read through the terms. He had been removing Angela and Dennis completely from his will. Completely. Instead, he had named Caleb and Caroline as the executors of his estate. He had known. He had been planning this from the very beginning. Her mind raced. The document, in its raw, unfiled form, was still a legal document. Graham had clearly wanted it finalized. He had anticipated this battle, had expected it all to come crashing down. The question now wasn't just what Angela and Dennis were hiding. It was how far they were willing to go to keep their hands on everything. Caroline quickly printed the document, her fingers shaking as the printer hummed to life. She time-stamped it, making sure everything was in order. This was Graham's final act, his final words. She sent the document to her lawyer, hoping it would be enough to hold up in court if things escalated. As the printer clicked off, Caroline sat back, staring at the freshly printed pages. She could feel the weight of it, the enormity of what she was holding. This was more than a will. This was Graham's lifeline, his last effort to fight back, and she would be the one to finish it. Just then, her phone buzzed, the sudden vibration making her jump. The name that appeared on the screen sent a chill down her spine. Angela. Caroline hesitated. A lump formed in her throat. She'd been expecting this, hadn't she? Angela had to know by now that Graham's death wasn't as simple as it seemed. She probably knew about the will, about the new changes, about the battle they were about to face. She answered the call. Caroline. Angela's voice came through, smooth and steady, but with an edge to it. We need to settle the estate. It's time. Caroline's heart hammered in her chest. Angela was playing it calm, but the words were like a warning shot across the bow. She wasn't ready for this. Not yet. Settle? Caroline repeated, her voice low, controlled. She couldn't let Angela hear the uncertainty in her tone. Why the rush, Angela? We've barely begun the process. Angela's laugh was cold, forced. Because the longer this drags on, the more damage it will do to the family. You wouldn't want that, would you? Caroline clenched her fists. The manipulative undertone in Angela's voice was undeniable. She wasn't just talking about settling the estate. She was talking about power, control. And she wasn't going to let Caroline stand in her way. I think we need to have a conversation about what's really going on, Caroline said, her voice cutting through the silence. We both know things aren't as simple as you're pretending they are. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough for Caroline to wonder if Angela was getting the hint. Then Angela's voice came back, sharp and commanding. Don't make me come over there, Caroline. We both know I can take everything from you. Don't test me. Caroline felt the words hit like a slap. Her pulse quickened. She couldn't let this go any further, not without the truth on her side. I'm not afraid of you, Caroline said, her voice steady now, despite the storm brewing in her chest. And you're not getting anything without a fight. Angela's voice faltered just for a moment. You'll regret this, she hissed. The line went dead. Caroline stood still, her breath shallow. The phone slipped from her hand onto the table. She had just made her move. And now the game had changed. The fight had only just begun. Caroline stood at the foot of Angela's front door, her hand hovering over the polished brass handle. The weight of the invitation pressed on her like a heavy coat, one she didn't want to wear, but had no choice but to accept. Angela had been insistent, the call laced with a tone that made it clear Caroline had no real choice in the matter. The door swung open with a soft creak, and Angela greeted her with a tight, controlled smile, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. Caroline, so good of you to join us, Angela purred, stepping aside to let her in. The smell of roasting meat and something sweet and herbal filled the air, making Caroline's stomach twist. Thanks for having me, Caroline replied, her voice sounding distant even to her own ears. She stepped inside, glancing briefly at Dennis, who was at the bar pouring glasses of deep red wine. He looked the same, smooth, well-groomed, that easygoing charm always present. He didn't look like someone who had spent months siphoning money from Graham's accounts, and yet Caroline could see the guilt hidden behind his polished exterior. Angela led Caroline into the dining room, where the table was set with elegant precision, each glass polished, the silverware arranged with obsessive care. The dinner was too perfect, too rehearsed, a performance. Caroline took her seat, trying to mask her unease beneath a veil of politeness. As she sat, Dennis slid into the chair beside her, his wineglass already half full. He clinked it against hers with a soft, practiced smile. To family, he said, his eyes glinting as he met her gaze. To family? Caroline echoed, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The weight of Graham's final words still hung heavily over her, like a shroud she couldn't remove. If I die, it wasn't random. As they settled into the meal, Caroline pretended to sip her wine, playing the part of the grieving widow, her thoughts racing beneath the surface. She kept her posture neutral, her eyes lowered, her fingers tracing the rim of the glass. She couldn't let on. Not yet. Angela pushed the conversation forward, her voice smooth, like she was trying to coax something out of Caroline. You know, Caroline, I've been thinking. Graham had been sick for a while, don't you think? Maybe his death wasn't such a tragedy after all. Maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe... She trailed off, her voice laced with a chilling, almost casual suggestion. Maybe he caused the crash himself. Caroline's heart stopped, a flicker of fury igniting in her chest. She didn't respond immediately, just allowed the words to sit in the air, heavy and venomous. Angela was pushing, testing the waters, trying to gauge Caroline's reaction. Dennis jumped in, his voice smooth, but too eager. Yeah, you know, he wasn't really mentally well lately. You could see it. He was losing his grip on reality. It's possible, right? He met Caroline's gaze with a forced smile, but there was something there. Something that didn't sit right. Caroline's stomach churned. She kept her face neutral, but inside, her thoughts were running wild. Maybe he caused the crash himself. Was this their plan all along? To turn Graham's death into a mental breakdown? To twist the narrative until it looked like he was the one at fault? I don't know what you're suggesting, Caroline said, her voice low but steady. But I don't believe Graham would have ever done that. Dennis shrugged nonchalantly, swirling his wine. Who knows what goes on inside someone's head? It's a complicated thing, grief. Sometimes people lose themselves. Angela's eyes flicked to Caroline, sharp and calculating. Caroline felt the weight of that gaze like a physical presence, like Angela was seeing through her, trying to peel back the layers. Caroline excused herself, needing a moment to regain control. Excuse me, I need to use the bathroom, she murmured, standing quickly and retreating from the table. As she walked down the hallway, her steps quick and deliberate, Caroline kept her breathing even. She had to think. She had to process everything. The way they were talking about Graham, about his death, like it was nothing but a mistake. She couldn't allow them to get away with this. She reached the bathroom and closed the door behind her, locking it for a moment of privacy. The sound of her breath filling the small space made her feel grounded again, but the tension in her body didn't loosen. She could feel her mind racing. Then a noise caught her ear, a faint buzzing coming from down the hall. She froze, her pulse quickening. It was coming from the guest room. Curiosity won out. She stepped out of the bathroom, moving silently down the hall toward the noise. She turned the corner, glancing into the guest room through the slightly ajar door. What she saw made her freeze. On the small wooden desk by the bed, a burner phone sat charging, the screen lit up with an incoming message. Angela's burner phone. Caroline's stomach lurched. She had known something was off about tonight. The dinner, the calmness, the lies. And now, this, the burner phone. It all clicked into place. Angela and Dennis had been hiding something, but this was proof. They were hiding their tracks, covering their bases. But what were they planning? Caroline's hand hovered by the doorframe, her body stiff with the realization that she was much closer to the truth than she'd thought. The danger wasn't just from Graham's family, it was from everyone involved in this twisted, calculated scheme. And now, Caroline was fully entrenched in it. The phone buzzed again. Caroline's heart raced, her fingers itching to pick it up, to see what was inside. But as she took a step forward, the door creaked open. She whipped around, her breath catching. Dennis stood in the hallway, a knowing smile on his face. "Looking for something, Caroline?" he asked softly. The office was quiet except for the hum of Nathan's old desktop, the sound of the mouse clicking through file after file. Caroline's fingers tapped nervously on the edge of the desk, but her mind was miles away, back to the moment in Angela's guest room, staring at that burner phone. The way it buzzed, the way it almost seemed to be calling out to her, beckoning her into a deeper mystery. Angela and Dennis were hiding something, but Caroline couldn't figure out what. As soon as she'd left Angela's house, she'd gone straight to Nathan's, barely able to contain the tension building inside her. She needed answers. Fast. Nathan had listened quietly as she relayed what she'd seen, the flash of the burner phone, Dennis's casual behavior. They were playing a game, a dangerous one, but Caroline wasn't sure of the rules yet, or how deep the game went. Now she was hunched over Nathan's desk, scrolling through the last few pieces of evidence she had. Images of the crash site, pictures of Graham's car, a mechanic's receipt that had been tucked in with the other files. She zoomed in on the image of Graham's car, the crumpled front end, the signs of something having gone terribly wrong, but it wasn't the wreck that caught her attention. It was the mechanic's uniform. The name embroidered on the left chest was barely legible, but Caroline's eyes locked on it. Cody. She clicked the photo again, zooming in to sharpen the details. Cody had worked on Graham's car last month, but that name, that uniform, it lingered in her thoughts. The receipt accompanying the image confirmed it. Cody's auto shop. The mechanic had done a basic tune-up. Nothing that would suggest any major repairs, but that was the thing. It was too mundane, too routine. Something wasn't adding up. Caroline grabbed the receipt and stared at the date. August 7th. The accident had happened nearly 2 weeks later. That didn't seem right. What had Cody done to the car? The receipt didn't show anything out of the ordinary, no red flags, nothing that would signal a reason for her to be suspicious. But then again, there was nothing in the documents that would tell her exactly what had happened to the car. Nathan, who'd been quietly reading over her shoulder, suddenly leaned in closer, his breath warm on her ear. "You think this mechanic has something to do with it?" His voice was low, guarded. Caroline didn't need to look at him to feel the weight of his question. It was the only thing that made sense now. She had thought the crash was a random tragedy, until the message from Graham's phone had changed everything. Don't trust them. The more Caroline thought about it, the more certain she became. The car had been tampered with. There was no other explanation. "I don't just think it, Nathan. I know it," she said, her voice steady with the certainty of her conviction. She turned the receipt over in her hands, running her fingers along the rough edges. Cody did something to the car. Nathan sat back, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "And you think someone paid him to do it?" Caroline nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the receipt. The pieces were starting to fit together now. Dennis had been involved in the money laundering. Angela was covering for him, trying to twist the story around. But the mechanic? That was new. She hadn't even considered it before, but now it was the missing link. Cody, working on Graham's car, just before the accident. Was he the one who had been paid to sabotage it? "I'm going to find him," Caroline said, her voice firm, unwavering. She had to know what Cody knew, if anything at all. She didn't care what kind of trouble she had to wade through. This was about more than just the will. It was about her husband's death, and Angela and Dennis's dirty hands. Nathan looked at her carefully, his brow furrowing in concern. "You're going after Cody?" "Absolutely," Caroline replied, her tone sharp. "I need answers. If Cody did this, if he was paid to ruin Graham's car, I want him to talk." Nathan nodded slowly, his expression still unreadable. "I'll help you," he said. "We'll track him down together. But you're playing with fire, Caroline. You're digging into something bigger than you think." Caroline felt her heart beat faster. She was already too deep to turn back now. "I don't care," she said firmly, standing up and grabbing the papers off the desk. "I won't let them get away with this. I won't let Graham's death be swept under the rug like some accident." Nathan watched her, his eyes lingering on the hard set of her jaw. "Just be careful," he warned softly. "Once you start down this path, there's no turning back." Caroline didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her bag, slipping the files inside, feeling the weight of the hard drive pressed against her side. This was just the beginning. As she stepped toward the door, Nathan called out to her. "Caroline, do you want me to help you track down Cody?" Caroline turned back, meeting his eyes. "You're already helping," she said quietly, her voice steady. "But I'm the one who's going to make them talk." Nathan didn't argue. He just watched her go, his expression unreadable. As Caroline stepped out of the office, the cool night air hit her, sharp and bracing. But even as the wind swept over her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Someone was keeping an eye on her, and she wasn't sure who it was anymore. But that didn't matter. She had a job to do, and Cody was the next piece of the puzzle. The park was empty, save for the scattered remnants of a fall breeze pushing leaves across the cracked concrete. The chill of the evening air clung to Caroline's skin as she pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. She had arrived early, expecting to see Caleb, but the place felt unsettlingly empty. Too quiet, too still. She glanced at her watch. 9:42 p.m. Caleb was late, as usual, but there was something about tonight that made the minutes tick by with extra weight. Her eyes darted to the shadows in the distance, but the park remained undisturbed. She couldn't shake the sense that she was being watched. That maybe, just maybe, someone was out there, waiting for her to make her move. Then, a figure stepped into view, moving cautiously, like someone who was constantly checking over his shoulder. It was Caleb. He didn't look much different than he had when they'd last seen each other. Dark jeans, a worn leather jacket, his eyes always scanning, always alert. But tonight, there was an edge to him, something sharp in his movements that spoke of nerves and secrets he was trying to keep buried. Caroline didn't wait for him to approach. She stepped forward, her breath catching as she saw the tension in his posture. She had seen Caleb this way before, on edge, hiding something. He stopped just a few feet away, glancing around quickly before finally settling his gaze on her. "You came alone?" His voice was low, wary. "I did," she replied. "What's going on, Caleb? Why meet here?" He hesitated, his fingers twitching at his side. "I didn't want anyone to know," he muttered. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket and held it out to her. "I didn't even want to bring this, but you need to hear it." Caroline took the flash drive, staring at it for a long moment before meeting his eyes. "What is it, Caleb? What's on here?" He swallowed hard, his face etched with a mix of guilt and regret. "It's everything. Graham." He knew. He knew what Angela and Dennis were doing. Caleb looked away, his voice lowering as though the words themselves could betray him. "A year ago, Graham told me about the forgeries, about the fake transfers, the documents being signed without his knowledge. He knew something was off, but he was trying to keep it quiet. He didn't want you involved, didn't want to drag you into it." Caroline's heart clenched. "He could have told me," she whispered, though she didn't know if she was saying it for Caleb's benefit or her own. The pain of not knowing was sharper now than it had been before. "Why didn't he tell me?" Caleb looked like he wanted to answer, but he couldn't find the words. Instead, he just shook his head, turning his back slightly. "He begged me not to tell you, said it was too dangerous. He knew someone was going to try to take him down. He tried to fix it himself, but..." "But?" Caroline pressed. "I think they crashed him on purpose," Caleb said, his voice barely audible. The words hung between them like a heavy fog. "It wasn't an accident. It couldn't have been." Caroline felt her breath catch. "You're saying they sabotaged his car," Caleb finished, his voice rough. "I don't have proof, but I know Graham. He wouldn't have driven that car if he thought it was unsafe." Her pulse quickened, her mind racing to put the pieces together. The money, the forged documents, the accident. It was all connected. She had known it, deep down. But hearing Caleb confirm it made the truth hit her with a force she hadn't expected. Graham had been murdered, and she was next. Her fingers gripped the flash drive tightly, her knuckles white against the cool metal. "What's on this, Caleb? What am I supposed to find?" Caleb didn't meet her eyes. "It's all there. Audio recordings. Graham talking to the mechanic. He knew he was being threatened. Her heart pounded in her chest as she glanced at the small drive, as if it could offer her all the answers she needed. And what do I do with it? Nothing, Caleb said quickly, shaking his head. Not yet. You don't know who's listening. You don't know who's in on this. You have to be careful. Graham left that for you, Caroline, but you can't trust anyone. Not even me. Caroline took a slow, steadying breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions threatening to take over. She couldn't let fear paralyze her. Not now. She had come too far to turn back. I don't care anymore, she said, her voice steady with resolve. I have to do this, Caleb. I won't let them get away with it. Caleb's expression softened, his eyes filled with regret. You're already in it, Caroline. They won't stop until they get what they want. You need to get out before it's too late. But Caroline wasn't listening anymore. She was already turning the flash drive over in her hand, the weight of it pressing against her palm like a lifeline. I'll be careful, she murmured, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were a lie. She wasn't going to be careful anymore. She was going to bring everything crashing down. As Caleb stood there watching her, Caroline made her way back toward the park entrance. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but the fire inside her was burning brighter than ever. She had the truth. She had the evidence. And now, she was going to make sure they paid for what they'd done to Graham. But as she reached the gate, a figure stepped out of the shadows blocking her path. It was Dennis. His face was cold, unreadable, but his eyes were locked on hers with a knowing look. Caroline's heart skipped. She knew, without a doubt, that he'd been following her. You've got something, don't you? Dennis's voice was low, smooth, and dangerous. Caroline didn't answer. She didn't need to. The game had just changed. The lawyer's office smelled of old leather, faintly of paper and dust, the kind of room where secrets were kept in the dark corners. Caroline felt the weight of the moment as she stepped inside, her heels clicking softly on the polished floors. The familiar tension gnawed at her, the same feeling she'd had when walking into Angela's house. Only now there was no act to perform, no pretending. This time, it was real. Her lawyer, Jacob Hall, sat behind a massive wooden desk, the kind that seemed designed to intimidate. He had a sharp jawline and dark, calculating eyes. He looked up from a stack of paperwork as she entered, and for a moment, he didn't say anything, just let the silence stretch. His expression was unreadable, like he was waiting for her to make the first move. Caroline walked in, her steps measured, carrying the heavy weight of the flash drive and the unsigned will in her bag. She set the bag down on the desk with a quiet thud, her hands trembling but steadying as she pulled out the files. She placed the flash drive in front of him. Then, the will. Graham's last testament. It felt like a death sentence in her hands. I need you to look at these, she said, her voice tight with restrained emotion. There's more going on than anyone knows. Graham wasn't just killed. He was set up. And the people behind it? They're still out there. Jacob didn't ask for further explanation. Instead, he slid the flash drive into his computer and clicked open the first file. The room felt smaller as they waited for the evidence to unfold on the screen, the clicking of the mouse, the only sound breaking the silence. Caroline watched him closely, her breath shallow as the files loaded. When the first audio clip started, Caroline felt her stomach churn. It was Graham's voice, clear and calm, even though she knew the context was anything but. They're threatening me, Graham's voice came through, calm but unmistakably scared. Caroline could hear the crackle of static, like Graham had been recording this in a hurry. Jacob paused the recording and looked at Caroline. His expression had shifted, but not by much. He didn't look shocked. He was too professional for that. But there was a glimmer of something in his eyes now, something that told her he was taking this seriously. This is Compelling, he said quietly, his voice tinged with a hint of concern. He rewound the recording, allowing the rest of the message to play. If I die, it wasn't random. Caroline closed her eyes at the words. They were the ones that had haunted her from the moment she saw them. She hadn't been able to forget them, hadn't been able to let them go. And now, hearing them again, the weight of the truth hit her like a freight train. Graham had known. He had known it was coming, and he had tried to leave her a trail, a warning. She blinked, forcing herself to stay grounded. The mechanic, she whispered. He's part of it. He sabotaged the car. They paid him to do it. Jacob nodded slowly, his fingers tapping on the desk as he processed everything. You're saying the accident was planned, that this wasn't just a tragic coincidence? His voice was a little slower now, more deliberate. Yes, Caroline said firmly. Graham knew. He had been trying to stop them. And now they're trying to bury everything. Jacob took a long breath, leaning back in his chair. You've got the evidence, Caroline. This is enough to freeze the estate. We can subpoena the mechanic. We can make a case. Her heart raced as the words sunk in. Finally. Finally, she was taking control of the situation. But then Jacob's expression turned serious. I'll tell you right now, though, you're going to face a fight, a dirty one. Angela and Dennis are not going to roll over. Caroline's jaw tightened. Good. So will I. The words were quiet, but fierce. She wasn't going to let them walk all over her. Not anymore. Not after everything Graham had been through. Jacob paused, looking at her with a sharp gaze. This isn't just about money, is it? He asked, his voice low. This is about something much bigger than that. You're playing with fire. Caroline met his eyes. I've already walked into the flames. I'm not backing out now. The silence between them stretched for a moment before Jacob nodded slowly. Okay, he said. I'll start the emergency filing. We'll name Nathan and Caleb as supporting witnesses. The sooner we get this in front of a judge, the better. Caroline felt the weight lift off her chest, just a little. They were moving forward now, gaining ground. She could feel the momentum building, the walls closing in on Angela and Dennis. The plan was starting to come together, the pieces finally fitting. But even as she began to feel the flicker of hope, Jacob spoke again, his voice low and steady. You realize, don't you, Caroline, that once you go public with this, once we start making waves, there's no going back. They will come for you. And when they do... Caroline cut him off, her voice firm and resolute. Let them. I'll be ready. Jacob leaned forward, his fingers tapping on the desk as he began drafting the charges. Attempted fraud, misappropriation of funds, and probable homicide. The words blurred in Caroline's vision, but she didn't look away. She had her evidence. She had her lawyer. And now, she had a purpose. As the words on the screen began to take form, the door to Jacob's office suddenly opened with a soft creak. Caroline's heart skipped a beat, her hand instinctively reaching for the files, but it was too late. A figure stepped into the room, tall and silent. Dennis. Caroline's blood ran cold. This was no longer just a game. The real fight was about to begin. Caroline's pulse was still racing from the confrontation with Dennis when she sat in her lawyer's office again, this time with a new stack of papers in front of her. The tension in her chest hadn't eased. If anything, it had only deepened. Angela's lawyer was on the phone now, the call coming in with a proposal that sounded almost too good to be true. Caroline could practically hear the smirk on his face through the line. The words that followed felt like a knife twisting in her gut. We can make this go away, Caroline. Drop the accusations and you'll get a generous cut of Graham's estate, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You and your family. Caroline clenched her fists on the desk, her nails digging into the wood. The offer was a slick one, too slick. She knew what Angela and Dennis were doing. They were trying to buy her silence, trying to erase the truth before it could even take hold. "No," she said, her voice low and steady, but the fire behind it was unmistakable. "I won't drop anything. Not now. Not after everything." She could almost feel the lawyer's breath on the other end as he paused, considering her refusal. "Caroline, you don't understand the position you're in. You don't know what you're risking here." Caroline let out a soft laugh, the sound dry, bitter. "I know exactly what I'm risking, but I'm not backing down." With a defiant click, she hung up the phone. Her fingers trembling slightly but steadying as the weight of her decision settled on her. She could feel the walls closing in around her, but she wasn't going to be intimidated anymore. The burner phone, the mechanic, the sabotaged car. Everything was leading her to this moment, and there was no way she was walking away now. "I'll go public if I have to," she muttered, mostly to herself, as she turned toward Nathan, who had been silently watching her from across the room. He had been the one to help her get this far. Nathan had been quiet all morning, his face etched with concern, his eyes constantly flicking to the door. They knew the stakes. "I'll threaten to take it all to the press," she continued, her voice thick with conviction. "Let the world know about the burner phone, about the mechanic, the fraud, everything. I'm done being quiet." Nathan's face softened, but there was a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Good. If they think you'll back down, they'll keep pushing. You've got to hit them where it hurts." Caroline nodded. "And I will." Jacob, her lawyer, had already been preparing the necessary documents, drafting emergency filings to freeze the estate and subpoena the mechanic, Cody. She knew Angela and Dennis would fight, but the truth was on her side. The evidence, the recordings. She had everything she needed to expose them. But there was still so much more to uncover. As Caroline's thoughts raced, Nathan handed her a set of papers, a notarized timeline of events. The weight of it was heavy. Official, tangible, undeniable evidence of what had been happening behind the scenes. Nathan's eyes met hers, his voice serious. "This timeline goes to the police," he said, the words simple but loaded with meaning. "They can't ignore it, not with everything you've got." Caroline stared down at the papers, the sense of urgency pulling at her. This was it, the final push. Just as she started to stand, ready to move forward, her phone rang, cutting through the tension in the room. She glanced at the screen. It was Dennis. Her heart skipped in her chest, and for a moment, she hesitated before answering. She knew what this was. He was going to threaten her, try to intimidate her into giving up. She took a deep breath before swiping to answer. "Caroline." Dennis's voice came through, low and calm, too calm. "You have no idea what you're starting. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into." Caroline's grip tightened on the phone, her nails biting into the screen. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing, Dennis. And you're not going to stop me." There was a long pause, and she could practically hear him sneering on the other end. "You'll regret this," he whispered, the threat in his voice clear. Caroline stood up, her voice unwavering. "You don't know what he finished." The line went dead. She stood there, staring at the phone for a long moment, her heart hammering in her chest. This was no longer a battle of wills. It was war. And she wasn't going to lose. As she turned back to Nathan and Jacob, she saw Caleb standing by the door, his face drawn and tired. Caroline's eyes narrowed slightly. She hadn't expected him to be here, but she wasn't surprised. "I'm moving in," Caleb said, his voice steady. "It's too dangerous for you to be alone. I'll keep watch." Caroline didn't protest. She knew Caleb was right. She couldn't afford to take any chances now. They were coming for her, coming for everything she had, and she needed to be ready. She nodded. "Thanks, Caleb. I'll take all the help I can get." And with that, They all turned to face the storm coming their way. The fight was only just beginning, but Caroline knew one thing for sure. She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The real battle had only just begun. The dimly lit room smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. Cody sat on the edge of the chair, his hands trembling slightly as he wrung them together. His face was ashen, eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights spent running from his own conscience. He had the look of a man who knew he was about to lose everything: his freedom, his dignity, and whatever small shred of integrity he had left. Caroline watched him from across the table, her posture rigid. She didn't feel sorry for him, not now, not after everything he had done. But she needed to hear it, the truth. Cody had agreed to meet with her, but only after Nathan's relentless persistence. The mechanic had been cornered, his guilt a heavy cloak wrapped around his shoulders. She leaned forward, her eyes cold, her voice sharp. "Cody, I need you to tell me what happened, what you did to Graham's car." His gaze flickered to the door before meeting hers, and for a moment, Caroline saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of what he knew was coming. He swallowed hard, then sighed, as if releasing a breath he had been holding for too long. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "They promised me protection. And Dennis told me to do it. He handed me cash, said I wouldn't get into trouble if things went south." Caroline felt a sickening jolt in her stomach. Dennis, the man who had been behind it all, the man who had orchestrated Graham's death, pulling strings from the shadows. "What did you do to the car?" Caroline asked, her voice tight, but she could barely hold the anger back. Cody shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "I loosened the bolts on the brake lines, just a little. Enough so they'd wear down, maybe snap, but not so much that it would be obvious. I rigged the brakes too, took out a couple of parts, swapped them with faulty ones, and wiped all the fingerprints." He stopped, his eyes flitting nervously around the room as though the walls were closing in on him. Caroline leaned forward, her eyes locking on his. "Who gave you the orders, Cody? Who's behind this?" His breath caught, and he hesitated as though the name would choke him. "Dennis," he whispered. "He gave me the cash, told me Angela promised she'd cover me. They said I wouldn't get caught if I kept my mouth shut." The air in the room felt thick, stifling. Caroline's mind was spinning, the full weight of his confession crushing down on her. Angela and Dennis had orchestrated Graham's death. They had used Cody as a pawn to remove him from the equation. But why? What did they stand to gain by eliminating him? "You knew this was wrong, didn't you?" Caroline's voice was low, but there was a biting edge to it. "You knew they were trying to kill him." Cody nodded, his face contorted with shame. "I knew, but I thought maybe it would just be a little accident. He'd walk away with a scratch or something. I didn't think it would end like this. I didn't think he'd die." His voice cracked on the last word, as though the weight of it had finally hit him. Caleb, who had been standing silently in the corner, stepped forward, his face pale and drawn. He looked at Cody, his voice breaking as he spoke. He knew. Graham knew they were going to do it. He knew they were going to kill him. Cody's head jerked up, and he stared at Caleb, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't process the words. Graham knew? Caleb's eyes were glassy with unshed tears, his voice thick with emotion. Yeah. He knew, Cody. He knew they were coming for him. He said it in those recordings. He was already dead before he even got in that car. Caroline's chest tightened as Caleb's words hung in the air, heavy and final. Her hands shook as she reached for the recorder on the table, the one Nathan had used to capture Cody's confession. She could barely hear the soft click of the device as it stopped recording. Her heart was beating too fast now, the reality of it all sinking in. Graham had known. He had left the recordings as proof, as a warning to her. He had known he was going to die, and he had tried to stop it. Without saying another word, Caroline stood, her breath shallow, her hands tight around the recorder. She was done being afraid. She was done letting them control her life. The confession was out there now. It was real. "I'm sending this to the police and my lawyer," she said, her voice as cold as the steel she felt inside. "This will bring them down, I'll make sure of it." As she turned to leave, Nathan's voice stopped her. "Caroline, you're sure about this? About everything?" Caroline looked back at him, her eyes sharp with resolve. "I have no choice now. They took everything from me. From Graham. It's time to make them pay." Outside the office, the world felt a little colder, a little darker, but Caroline didn't flinch. She had the truth. She had the confession. And now, nothing, no one could stop her. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, she felt like she was in control. The pieces were finally falling into place. And she wasn't going to let Angela or Dennis win. As she sent the files off to her lawyer, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. The courtroom was stark and cold, the walls lined with polished oak, the air thick with the weight of expectations. Caroline sat at the witness stand, her hands folded in front of her, her spine straight. Her breath was shallow, her chest tight, but her face remained calm. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let fear take over now. Across the room, Angela sat, her face a mask of carefully controlled composure. Her eyes were sharp, darting between the proceedings and the lawyers at her side. Dennis, seated behind her, looked impassive, his fingers drumming on the wooden table. Caroline could feel their eyes on her, but it didn't matter anymore. This was her moment. Caroline glanced briefly at Nathan, seated beside her lawyer, Jacob. He gave her a reassuring nod. His presence was a steady anchor in the storm swirling around them. He had been the one to help her piece together the evidence, to track down Cody's confession, to uncover the truth that had been hidden for far too long. Now, it was time for everything to come to light. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Miles, stood up, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "Ms. Rhodes, I'd like to ask you to play the recording of your husband's voice, the one you received after his death." Caroline nodded, her hands steady as she pulled the small device from the table and pressed play. The courtroom fell silent as Graham's voice filled the room, calm, steady, but with an undercurrent of fear that made Caroline's stomach twist. "They're threatening me," Graham's voice echoed through the room, followed by the crackling static. "If I die, it wasn't random." Caroline's heart clenched, the words hitting her like a punch. She could almost feel Graham beside her, his presence still alive in that voice. The courtroom was silent, the weight of the confession sinking in. Rebecca turned to the judge. "As you can hear, the defendant, Dennis Whitlow, had been directly implicated by the victim in an attempt on his life." She turned back to Caroline. "Did you know about these threats before Graham's death?" Caroline's voice was steady as she answered. "Yes. He didn't want to involve me, but I knew he was investigating something dangerous. He was trying to protect me, but in the end, he left me the recordings as proof." Nathan stood up then, his voice calm but firm as he began to speak, confirming what Caroline had just testified to. "Your Honor," Nathan began, "I conducted an investigation into the financials of the Rhodes family business. I found falsified documents, forged signatures, and illegal transfers of money, all leading back to a fake LLC that was registered under Dennis Whitlow's name. I have the evidence to prove it." He handed over a set of documents to the court clerk, who passed them to the judge. As the judge looked through them, the tension in the room became palpable. Caroline's breath was caught in her throat, but she kept her gaze steady, focused. "Further," Nathan continued. I located a safety deposit box that contained evidence of a broader conspiracy. A letter from Mr. Rhodes, stating his fears that he was about to be targeted for his knowledge of illegal activities within the family. The judge nodded, flipping through the documents. The words fraud, embezzlement, and forgery jumped off the page like fire. The room was tense, but Caroline felt a flicker of hope. They were winning. The truth was coming out. But the real blow came when Rebecca played the recordings of the wire transfers, the hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned from the Rhodes family accounts, all funneled into the mysterious LLC. The proof was irrefutable. The prosecution called the mechanic, Cody, who confirmed his role in sabotaging Graham's car at Dennis's request. His confession, so raw and guilt-ridden, had the desired effect. Dennis's hand tightened into a fist on the table, his face reddening. He looked like a man who had just realized the walls were closing in. As the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, Caroline's eyes flicked to Angela, whose mask of composure was beginning to crack. Her face was pale, her lips trembling as she gripped the arms of her chair. She knew what was coming. Then it was Angela's turn to speak. She took the stand. But it was clear she was no longer in control. Her words were shaky, her story inconsistent. When confronted with the forged documents, she stammered and faltered, unable to explain away the blatant evidence. Her lies began to unravel. Finally, it was her breakdown that shattered any remaining illusions. On the witness stand, Angela's carefully constructed persona cracked. She was caught in the web of her own deceit, and she had nowhere left to hide. Caroline watched it all from the stand, a tight knot in her chest loosening just a little with each passing second. She could feel the weight of everything she had lost, but also everything she was about to gain, the justice, the closure for Graham. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, addressed the court. The estate is to be frozen pending the trial. All assets under Dennis and Angela Whitlow's control are now subject to investigation. Given the overwhelming evidence of criminal activity, we will be proceeding with charges of fraud, embezzlement, and probable homicide. Caroline felt her breath catch in her throat as the words sank in. They had done it. The truth was no longer buried. As the gavel came down, signaling the end of the hearing, Caroline stood. Her legs were shaky, but her heart was lighter than it had been in days. The courtroom emptied, but before she could move toward the exit, there was a sudden round of applause from the back of the room. Caroline turned to see a group of Graham's old friends, people he had trusted, standing in the doorway, clapping and nodding in approval. They had been watching from the sidelines, and now, they were finally seeing justice for their friend. Caroline's chest tightened again, but this time, it was with relief. She had done it. As she walked out of the courtroom, the applause still ringing in her ears, she knew this was only the beginning. But for the first time since Graham's death, she felt like she was finally in control. The real battle had been won, and the war was over. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow across the wide expanse of the porch where Caroline sat. The air had the faint bite of fall, but the chill no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a promise. The kind of promise that came after a storm had passed, leaving only calm in its wake. Her eyes traced the lines of the new house, the fresh paint still gleaming on the exterior, the flowers she had planted blooming quietly along the path. The house wasn't just a new beginning, it was a testament to everything she had fought for. Everything Graham had fought for. She glanced at her watch. Sunday. Caroline reached into her pocket and pulled out the old cracked phone, the one that had belonged to Graham. It still felt like his, even though the world had moved on. She couldn't bring herself to get rid of it. Maybe it was because she didn't know how to let go of the man he had been, or maybe it was because he had left it for her. Left her with that final cryptic message, the one that had haunted her for so long. Her fingers lingered over the screen, the familiar swipe unlocking it, the face recognition granting her access. The home screen flashed, and once again, the emptiness of it hit her. It had been months since that day, the day everything changed. Angela and Dennis were long gone, indicted, their assets frozen. They had tried to bury the truth, but the weight of Graham's evidence had brought them down. Their names, once so prominent in the Rhodes family business, were now nothing but a footnote in a court ruling. The old money and lies had crumbled to dust, their legacy erased by their own greed. Caroline's fingers brushed the screen, and the text message from Graham's burner phone popped up again. Don't trust them. She had come to understand the truth of it. The message was not just a warning about Angela and Dennis. It had been about something bigger, about the lengths they were willing to go to hide the truth. But the truth had come out, and now the world knew the reality of what had happened. Graham's name had been cleared. His legacy was now one of justice. His death was not in vain. The soft murmur of footsteps behind her caught her attention. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, his face less haunted than it had been when she first met him. He had fought his own battles, and now, finally, he was sober and focused, no longer carrying the weight of guilt. He was beginning to believe in himself again. "How's it feel?" Caroline asked softly, not looking at him, but feeling the shift in the air as he stood beside her. "Good," Caleb said, his voice steady. "Feels like I can breathe again." He paused, his eyes drifting to the open field before them. "You were right. About everything." Caroline's lips quirked up slightly, but there was no real humor in it. "It doesn't change anything. Not really." "Maybe not," Caleb agreed, "but it's a start. For both of us." Caroline smiled, the gesture small but genuine. They had both lost something, but they had found pieces of themselves in the wreckage. That was the start. She stood up, stretching out her back. The motion was easy now, her body not as tense as it had been for months. Things had changed. Things were finally beginning to heal. As she turned, her eyes met Nathan's, who was standing at the doorway, watching them both with that same quiet, reserved look. There was something comforting about his presence, something she could rely on. "I'll be around," Nathan said, his voice low but reassuring. "But I think you'll be okay now." Caroline nodded, her heart lightening with the knowledge that they had done everything they could. She could almost hear Graham's voice, in her head now, calm, like it always was, even when the weight of the world had been on his shoulders. "Thanks, Nathan," she said, her voice steady. "You helped us more than you'll ever know." Nathan gave a small smile, but it was clear there was still more left unsaid between them. "I just did what anyone would do." He paused, his expression becoming a little more serious. "I'll keep the burner phone just in case." Caroline nodded again. "You should." Nathan turned to go back inside, but before he disappeared, he looked back at her once more. "I know you're going to keep fighting. You'll keep doing the right thing. You always do." Caroline watched him go, her mind briefly drifting back to the day she had stood in that courtroom, facing the people who had tried to break her. They hadn't broken her. As the soft rustle of the wind through the trees mingled with the hum of a new day, Caroline sat back down, the phone still in her hands. The sunlight caught the screen in a way that made the message appear one last time, the words still fresh in her mind. Don't trust them. But now she understood. Graham had trusted her. He had left her with the truth. And in the end, it was she who had brought the truth to light. The phone never buzzed again. Caroline set it down on the porch beside her, letting the moment linger. Then, with a deep breath, she stood and walked back inside. Her fight was over. But the legacy? That was just beginning. At my husband's funeral, a text popped up on his phone. Don't trust them. The sender's name? His own,